I'd never followed anyone before, apart from those few yards I'd followed Kamiko and her friend Jo to the bus stop. If I had, I would probably have known that a Thursday night in March wasn't the best time to be doing it. The southbound platform at Archway was long, exposed and far from crowded, and the fact I was carrying a very conspicuous guitar case didn't help either. I waited halfway up the stairs until I heard a train approaching. As it stopped, I walked down onto the platform. I could see Anne much further along, waiting by the doors. They opened with a series of beeps and we both got on. All of a sudden, I felt incredibly excited. This must be what it feels like to be a spy. Everyday activities like strap hanging become adrenaline-flooded adventures. People who change carriage whilst the train is moving are always suspicious, seedy, but I needed to keep Anne in sight. By the time the train reached Kentish Town, I travelled half its length and had positioned myself where I could glimpse Anne if I moved my head a few inches to the left. Just before Camden, Anne stood up. It looked like she was going to get off. I waited until she passed down the platform, then went after her. I've never felt more conspicuous, like the honey monster or something. Anne, it soon became clear, was changing line, still heading south then. On the next train, I was able to position myself in roughly the same place. There had been a few dangerous moments as I got on, when Anne might have spotted me. Again, Anne stood up just before the station where she was intending to get off, Elephant Castle. She walked right past my carriage, then turned down the passageway towards the exit. As I followed her, I remembered Elephant didn't have escalators, but lifts. Anne went straight into the one on the right. After the doors closed, I went to wait for the next one. It took a long time to come, and I became certain that I'd lost Anne. A couple of minutes later, I exited the station. My first idea had been to check the southbound bus stops. I hurried along. A light drizzle was falling. Quite a few people were waiting around, and one of them I saw with delight was Anne. She was standing at the stop for the 35. My suspicions were further confirmed when a 35 drew into sight and Anne moved forwards with the rest of the damp crowd. Obviously, it was too much of a risk for me to take the same bus as Anne, but just then, as they have a tendency to do, a second 35 came into view. Once on board, I stood in the downstairs aisle. From there, I will be able to keep an eye on people getting on and off the bus in front, just as long as we stayed in sight. We did. All the way to Camberwell Green, where Anne got off and walked straight towards me. Her eyes seemed to pass over my face. But thank God, they weren't focused. She carried on past the bus that I'd completely forgotten I was on, so horribly exposed to the field. Its doors remained open for a few seconds longer, just enough time for me to squeeze out. The rest was easy. I followed out at a safe distance away from the main roads down to the side streets. The drizzle had turned to something approaching a mist. Around now, I began to feel immensely tender towards Anne. Someone was following her, and she didn't know. It could have been anyone intending anything. The fact it was me and I was harmless didn't make any difference to the essential situation, young woman being followed. Her slender back seemed too unbearably vulnerable. I wanted to warn her to be more on her guard. The house Anne finished her the front door. For a few minutes I watched the house to see if any of the bedroom lights went on. Only one of the windows was lit up, that at the very top of the house, the attic room. However, the curtains of the bay windows were open, and I could see blue light on the ceiling. Someone was in there watching television. I checked my watch. It was 10:15. As the street was solidly residential, I couldn't hang around for very long without seeming suspicious. So I walked to the far end, turned around and was going to make one quick pass before heading home. But when I reached Anne's house, I saw something through the bay window. Joe. Kamiko's new friend, Joe, the side of Joe's face. I was sure it was her. There was only one square-jawed Joe. I stopped and stared. Luckily, she and Anne were totally caught up in their conversation, which was lively and full of laughter. Between and behind them, I could see another figure coming into view. Female, black-haired, familiar. I stepped back into the road to bring them into sight and was almost run over by a motorbike. It swerved and beat. The rider called me a cunt. I ducked down. No one came to the window. What was the beat of the horn compared to what they were discussing? When I stood up again, very cautiously, enough to give me a very clear view of Kamiko, a big smile on her face. More laughter. They were all three of them, in on the joke, which was me. I turned to begin making my slow, humiliated way